Namaste and welcome. You're watching my podcast channel. I'm Arup Chatterjee, and this is another episode of the Legends of Philosophy of Science. And with me here is our very eminent guest, Professor Dr. Naresh Singh from the previous episode. Professor Naresh Singh, how have you been?
I've been well, thanks. Thanks, Arup.
So today we thought that we would go slightly counterintuitive and not necessarily talk about science or what surely doesn't seem like science. And we'll go more into areas of philosophy. Of course, there are integral connections with science that we will try to make. And towards the end of this episode, we'll try to bring together the loose threads as they are. But in modern day India, and indeed globally, we are seeing the rise of a kind of a very slippery language, apart from slippery slopes. So a lot of things that are not scientific are indeed being termed as science. And as we discussed in the previous episode, people like Max Planck, Albert Einstein, and the others who had, who experienced such enchanting aspects of life are sometimes not treated as scientific at all. So this is the ironic world that we are living in. I don't want to speak too much. I would like our guest to do more of the talking. Uh, so something which is related to science and yet not scientific or somebody, or rather in our collective imagination of India is Swami Vivekananda.
Mm.
Because Swamiji had a kind of a, you know, the role of giving the idea of the Indian Institute of Sciences in Bangalore, as the story goes, when he was traveling in a ship. And Swamiji was very passionate about sciences. He was also very passionate about physical activity, work
Mm.
that can be done with the hands. So instead of reading the Gita, one should have played football, according
Mm-hmm.
to Swami Vivekananda. So, Professor
Allah.
Naresh, I was
Mm.
wondering, how do we see the ideas of Swami Vivekananda and Vedanta, Advaita Vedanta, especially as being amenable to the kind of work that you've been doing?
Mm-hmm.
So, do you think there's a connection between policy making and Vivekananda in today's world?
Well, thanks again, Arup, for having me on this second episode. And that's a really interesting way for us to start today. Look, Swami Vivekananda, as we all know, has had a very profound impact on India and as well as the world. I have read a lot about his life, his works, and so on. But for this podcast, I'll pick on 2 points. One is that a lot of people continue to believe that spirituality is for seclusion,
Mm-hmm.
is for, the cave, so to speak, jap karo,
Mm.
stay in your room, and or in near to your little temple in your home. When I started to realize my own true nature over time, it becomes a really joyous feeling. You really
Mm-hmm.
want to stay with yourself
Mm-hmm.
because you are learning, at least for me, I had not learned how to love myself.
Mm-hmm.
So that feeling is really powerful because ultimately what you are loving is really the divine in you. So when you say you're loving yourself and you have found out who you are, it's not that selfish love that one might assume. So one could become a recluse. The life of Swami Vivekananda, the life of Mahatma Gandhi, and other deeply spiritual people have taught us that spirituality belongs in the real world. Comes to mind Swami Agnivesh as well in his little book called Applied Spirituality,
Mm-hmm.
where I got the part of the name for my center, having read that little book. So I decided, having been influenced by these people, that we should be able to connect our spiritual insights to public policy to make the world a better place. And that is why we call part of the center's name applied spirituality, and public policy. Now, many people continue to believe that's really a private affair, and not only private, it's inner,
Mm-hmm.
and public policy is outer, it's there. But the difference is that it is action in the world that is guided by this deeper source. So, Swami Vivekananda's life has influenced me greatly in terms of the inspiration he has provided and the confidence he gives us to act in the world and to raise the question to policymakers. I mean, I've heard a lot of criticism of Mahatma Gandhi, for example, but
Mm-hmm.
I've never heard criticism of Swami Vivekananda.
Mm-hmm.
That's one point I would make about his life and its links to public policy and action in the world. The other point I'd make is the very famous thing he did in Chicago
Mm-hmm.
at the Parliament of World's Religions. And I link that back to my own work. I am in the course I was teaching at the master's level on applied spirituality and sustainable development policy. Towards the end of the course, one of my students asked, I was trying to make it clear, but clearly I'd failed. I was trying to make it clear that, you know, spirituality was distinct from religion in my
Mm-hmm.
mind. And what we were working with was secular spirituality. Nevertheless, towards the end, the student asked, Sir, I really enjoyed this class, excepting that if you can make it a little more atheist friendly,
Mm-hmm.
it would be really good for a broader spectrum
Mm-hmm.
of people. So I was kind of stumped,
Mm-hmm.
for a second or two. And then I said to her, I said, let me answer your question this way. The first thing is, you haven't heard me use the word God
Mm-hmm.
in this lecture, in this entire course, have you? So then she was stumped. But then I said, I'll answer you by quoting from Swami Vivekananda, who was asked the question in Chicago.
Mm-hmm.
Must have been around 1893 or something when he made that famous speech. And he was asked the question, so Swamiji, what do you say to atheists? And his response was, well, I haven't met one. What do you mean by atheist? And the person said, someone who does not believe in God.
Mm.
And his response was, you mean someone who does not believe in himself or herself?
Yes.
So those two things continue to resonate with me, his action in the world and his understanding of our own true nature, which is divine, not the ego, which could become a mistake. If you mistake your ego for your true nature and think of that as the divine, that is even worse than having never thought about it. So going beyond that is what I think he has taught us.
Well, precisely. And I don't want to make it seem like I understand every word of what you are saying, because if I did, then maybe,
You
we
should have,
all we
you would
all
have
would
been
have had
teaching my course.
yes, partly that, and partly I would have had a lot more faith in myself, because
Okay.
as far as I understand,
Mm,
and I'm a passionate student of Vedanta myself, but as far as I've understood, is that I haven't understood anything, because it's much more about practice than theory,
mm,
and how to apply it in practice is has been the key
mm,
challenge for me and perhaps most of us. But without deconstructing whatever you said, because that is itself so valuable. Let me ask you, this question about how Swamiji Vivekananda has been turned into an icon, and for right reasons, but that makes him and other icons like him, like the Buddha, for example. Apparently, I was recalling just in a recent review of a book on Swami Vivekananda, I was recalling what Alan Watts said about the Buddha. And Alan Watts reportedly heard somewhere that the Buddha had preached that if you find the Buddha, that is somebody like me, kill him. I think by that, Alan Watts meant that the Buddha nature, the true nature, cannot be commodified, it cannot be objectified, it cannot be given a deified form so easily. So when we try to, for good reasons,
mm.
deify icons like Swamiji, and that gets appropriated into political channels.
Mhm.
Now there are other examples too. You have yourself done a fair deal of work on the integral humanism of Deen Dayal Upadhyay. So would you like to talk, share any of your insights about what integral humanism is and how that connects with Swamiji's philosophy, if at all there's any connection,
Mhm.
and if there have been any pitfalls, supposing you are comfortable talking about it. So,
Mhm.
are there any pitfalls that we should remind ourselves of?
Yes, I am. I happen to have a connection
Hmm.
to the Dayal Research Institute.
Oh, okay.
Indeed, we had a Zoom call with that institute, the people who run it.
Mm-hmm.
I visited, gave a keynote there last year,
Mm-hmm.
or the year before rather, and went to the villages where they're doing excellent work.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Pandit Dayal's articulation of integral humanism, as I recall, was an attempt to make a link, hence integral, between life in India's villages
Mm-hmm.
and the vision of India as a political entity on the global stage.
Right.
And I think he did a great bit of writing. He wasn't a policy expert,
Mm-hmm.
but he was politically inclined and he was visionary in many ways of his thinking. Now, some people dismiss him nowadays because of they probably link his work and his thinking to more fundamentalist thought and so on. But I think there is a lot that one can gain from that vision that he
Mm-hmm.
articulated,
Mm-hmm.
never mind the kinds of today's linkages that are happening.
Mm-hmm.
And that link is somehow reflected in work that we do as well.
Okay.
My colleagues and I have developed what we call an integral approach to public policy.
Mm-hmm.
In that integral approach to public policy, what we seek to do is to bring the inner dimension
Mm-hmm.
along with the macro micro links. So, in other words, how do you bring the actor
Mm-hmm.
into the public policy space? Because typically, humans, policymakers, scientists, myself included, for many years, although working on systems, the system I was working on was out there, I was here.
Mm-hmm.
The policymaker sees the world as separate from himself or herself, and hence developing an integral approach begins to bring that policymaker and let him or her realize that they are part of the system they are trying to change.
Mm-hmm.
And hence the old saying that Gandhiji had said, you know, be the change you want to see in the world, for me is enshrined or integrated in this kind of integral thinking,
Mm-hmm.
where the beginning of the system is the inner dimension. And by inner, I mean the psycho spiritual nature of humans. And how does that influence the behavior of humans,
Mm-hmm.
which in turn influences the bigger circle of life around you,
Mm-hmm.
and finally, public policy in the nation state.
Right.
And that is my current, if you like, interpretation of what Pandit Dayal had articulated at that time
Mm-hmm.
when he was articulating, when India needed a kind of a political vision,
Mm-hmm.
a country that was, coming out of the mess that the Brits had put it in. And to see what the work being done at the Deen Dayal Research Institute in Chitrakoot
Mm-hmm.
is refreshing. They have been working in over 500 villages where the livelihoods of local people in the villages. And Nana Deshmukh,
Mm-hmm.
was integral in setting up that field unit in Chitrakoot. So um, the vision lives, slightly different form, maybe.
I am actually still concerned with your, or rather fascinated, I should say, with your analogy of the cave. How spirituality belongs not to the cave but to society at large. So to go back to the first question, and then I'll come back to the more, you know, political and social dimensions as well. To return to the first question, when you say that the individual cannot afford to practice spirituality in a cave, and the public policy expert cannot afford to be to see himself or herself as separate from the system, do you mean to say that this kind of applied spirituality can only work in society? In other words, it requires the active tension, the active resistance of material forces that are very short term, that have a very short term vision, and that have a very, to put it in your students' vocabulary, atheistic vision, people who have less faith in themselves. In other words, I'm asking you, so I can understand, or maybe the listener will be able to understand that spirituality is a process of self cleansing or self realization, self actualization. And that actualization can only happen in the face of resistance, confrontations, and tensions and dialectics. Now, how does the public policy expert implement, the analogy, or how does he or she undergo the same kind of experience that an individual goes in their spiritual journey? Is this making sense to you?
I think I understand the question
Yeah.
you because I think I have an answer for it.
Okay.
And the answer is really very short. The answer is no. Your spiritual realization
Hmm.
need not be require engagement in social action. I might have given the wrong impression
Hmm.
by not clarifying that. I chose to do that,
Hmm.
inspired by a few people who have done it. I believe that the largest, by far the great majority
Hmm.
of people who have come to understand their own true nature
Hmm.
have not engaged in social action. They have chosen to either become spiritual teachers, gurus, have a following that sits around their feet, and live their lives like that, or they are sitting in the Himalayas with long beards, birds building nests in their hair and stuff. I mean, that's a legitimate way to live, in my view. Um, I chose, like inspired by Swami Vivekananda, by Mahatma Gandhi, by Nelson Mandela, by Martin Luther King, and all of them. It doesn't have to be just Indian. There are people all around the world, who have never articulated a connection to a
Hmm.
spiritual nature, but have acted in the same principle
Hmm.
that have flown from the universal energies, one might say, without using any spiritual or
Jargon.
jargon. You
Hmm.
don't have to use that. It
Right.
is going to a deeper place within you and
Hmm.
asking some questions. The
Hmm.
basic one being, who am I?
Hmm.
Or what am I? And let
Right.
that energy that flows. And then, like I said, I could have chosen to sit in my study and
Hmm.
maybe drink coffee and listen to classical music and be very happy after 2 hours of meditation.
Hmm.
You find somebody like a very popular writer, Yuval Noah Harari.
Yes,
Many people don't know that Harari spends 2 hours every day in meditation
he does.
and
Yes.
2 months every year in
Yeah.
addition in meditation.
Yeah.
And the
In fact,
clarity,
visits India very often
that's right,
for the same reason.
and the clarity of mind and so on, he ascribes to his the clarity that comes
Hmm.
from being in touch with oneself. He has a Buddhist inclinations. He does
Yeah.
not have to be. But you also raised a very important point. So that's one clarification. But I fully agree with the other point that you make. Some people say that the Buddha will cry if he came and saw the Buddhist monks in
Mm.
today's world,
Mm.
who are, so many of them are sort of depriving themselves of
Mhm.
all kinds of things. The Buddha tried it and it didn't work, the deprivation path.
Mhm.
And that is in the Buddhist literature. If any spirit, Swami Vivekananda would probably suffer the same fate. He would probably be in tears
Mhm.
to see how his name has been used. And we talked about football
Mhm.
as a political football, one might say. Um, and here is the bottom line. I mean, we can cite so many great spiritual teachers who have inspired us.
Mm.
The bottom line is that we confuse the messenger with message,
Right.
and we don't internalize and act. So many people I have seen who are almost lost when their guru, their spiritual teacher passes on.
Mm.
That should be one of the greatest moments when the earthly bond breaks
Mhm.
and you get even further liberated, that joy,
Right.
right?
Right.
That comes from that passing. But they get attached to that physical body.
Mhm.
That is why the path, the self realization path, is so critical. If you don't figure out who you are and you continue to either believe or, or, or fail to disconnect
Mhm.
and to know that, yes, your body is there and your spirit is embodied,
Mhm.
but that's not the total you. It's far from the truth. And you only get there, like you said, it's not an intellectual understanding. And a lot of the questions that arise when you have this discourse is because we are talking of something that we really cannot talk about. And let me explain that if it sounds like a kind of oxymoron. In absolute silence, by definition, which is when you really come face to face with your true reality, so there
Mhm.
are no thoughts now, and the physical body is not the main preoccupation for at least
Right.
that moment. At that part, the mind is silent. If the mind is not silent, you can't get there. The mind is silent. By definition, there are no words, there is no thinking, and you can only talk and communicate when you think and when
Mhm.
you have words.
Mm.
So what happens at that space can only be communicated with another through concessionary language. It can never be sound.
Mm.
It's always partial, and you can give pointers a little. Like Ramana Maharshi used to teach by silence.
Mhm.
He was a powerful yogi, having been fully realized himself. So when we try to talk of that reality, that inner reality, bear in mind that we are using language which comes closest, metaphors, pointers, guidelines, whatever you want to call it, but never dealing with the real reality.
So now, I mean, to not to be a spoil sport, but
Please
this
be.
this amazing, very deep, extraordinary realization,
Mm,
which is indescribable, and at the same time, you're trying to put it in such a coherent language. How do we, or how do you rather, how do you apply it to public policy?
yeah,
In can we instantiate? Are there concrete examples? I remember you talking about a water policy research.
right.
The previous week we met. Are there concrete examples for the material world? Because
Absolutely.
we are, as you had reminded me, we are embodied. So we
Correct.
are living in an embodied society.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So are there concrete
Yeah,
examples where?
well, emerging, one might say.
Mhm.
I'll give you a few examples that our
Right.
listeners might be able to relate to. Coming back, let's take the example of the Deen Dayal Research Institute. So they're working in the villages with livelihoods.
Mhm.
Now, the sustainable livelihoods approach is approach to poverty reduction that I
Mhm.
led the teams at UNDP in
Right.
developing globally
Right.
this approach. Now, what we are doing is we are going to test in the field whether people who practice some form of yoga or some practice in which they connect to themselves or they gain greater self realization. And it could be, we know there are six main paths to self realization through yogic practices. It could be hatha yoga, it could be bhakti yoga, and so on. There are these six paths. Raja yoga through meditation. It doesn't always have to be through meditation,
Mhm.
although that's the path that was more helpful to me. So these kind of people that you find,
Mhm.
we will build in to the surveys that they will carry out in the villages, which are starting very soon. We were
Mhm.
discussing today the project concept note.
Mhm.
We will begin to look to see whether there is a difference
Mhm.
in their livelihoods in the way the level of happiness. In fact, my colleagues are calling their project Shine. That came from the DRI, the Dindal Research Institute. And that Shine index that they will use to measure change is really sustainability and happiness index for the new era. They have come up with that name, which I'm really happy about. But we are working together to see what indicators we will use to measure that change, where we find people who are more connected to themselves. Is the happiness thing changing? Is the sustainability practices changing? So that's one example. You made mention of the work in on water policy, and my PhD student in Maharashtra, what she's going to do, she has found an agency, Mission 500, that has a large coverage in which they have been working on water access. She's going to use that natural population to see again whether, and we have devised a kind of, if you like, an analytical instrument, a survey instrument, which has a bunch of questions. We will be looking at, and she will do in-depth interviews with people to get to see whether this kind of realization is influencing the way they treat water, and whether those insights can come back and affect water policy. If we don't get those insights, if, for example, there is no difference, and we are open to that, it might very well be that people who are self realized, it has no impact on the material world. We don't know that yet. Or I shouldn't say the whole material world, at least in that water world in which people live. We have also been thinking of a project. We did not get the funding, so that might not go ahead in looking at the influence of Sufism in Kashmir. Now, of all Indian states, as we know, 95% of Kashmir is of Muslim religious orientation. The Sufi saints of Kashmir were really involved in politics, heavily involved in politics. So we want to do a survey to see how Sufism has influenced politics and public policy. We think it will be a natural experiment to understand Sufism, for our listeners, being the spiritual dimensions of Islam, and see how that has influenced politics and public policy. The last point I'd make to show you the link to the material world is, so put it really simply, you call yourself a human being, I suspect, not a human doing.
Yes, a human being.
Right. So what you are busy with your life, your embodied life, two things. Tell me if I'm wrong. You're busy doing things, and you're busy having things.
Yes.
But or any human being, huh? They're thinking, they're planning what I'll do tomorrow, what I've been doing yesterday. I have to do this. I have a schedule. I have a calendar. Busy, busy, busy. And the next thing is that people are always looking. I have to get a house. I have to get a car. I have to get a bicycle. I have to get a new book, a new computer. Having. So we are not called human doing. We're not called human having. We are called human being. Now, why do I say that? It might look simplistic, but all of political economy, which is the heart of public policy, has been on who gets what how. That is the study of political economy. Now, a colleague and a friend has written a book, The Politics of Being. What is it if we focused on being life support systems rather than our busy lives in doing and having? And to go further, Rabbi Michael Lerner in the US, who I was fortunate to engage with, he must have passed on now, he wrote a book called Revolutionary Love. In the book, he was a political scientist and a rabbi. He asked a question: what would public policy in the United States look like if its objective was greater harmony in the society, greater unity, greater love, rather than merely material and economic growth? That is the connection. I mean, he is a rabbi, But you see, various people are beginning to make the connection between this understanding and politics and policy. I, the work we are doing, we are trying to connect local livelihoods
Mm,
with that insight, which will then go. I'm talking to my colleagues out in DRI that we have to brief the Chief Minister
mm,
of Madhya Pradesh very soon, so he or she can be waiting for the results, positive or negative.
mhm,
Whatever we learn, we'll share. Um, of course, this is the work is new; it's tentative,
mhm,
so it would not it will be wrong for us. We wouldn't be proper social scientists if we were to come to sweeping conclusions in 3 years.
mm.
It'll take a little while. But if nothing else, we will refine our methodology.
So just to summarize, and I know the word summarize sounds almost reductive in the light of whatever you said, but there were what from what I heard or what I could assimilate, at least three extremely important verticals, at least, have been addressed by, apart from Kashmiri Shaivism and Kashmiri Sufism, three key verticals from the material domain have been addressed. One is economics, another is water resources, and another is mental health, emotions. So you are trying to, or you were trying to assess if there's a direct correlation between people who practice any of the yogas knowingly or unknowingly. Okay, I don't know if I'm
No, so far you're going great. No,
misrepresenting you,
no,
but
great.
this is another realization people come to, that maybe for 30 years or 40 years they had been practicing some kind of yoga in any case. So people who've been knowingly or unknowingly practicing some yogic dimension, bhakti yoga, hatha yoga, raja yoga. Um, in your methodology, you're trying to assess whether they are economically better off, emotionally better off, and whether they have a better kind of individual policy towards water, water resources. This was, I don't know. I mean, this is amazing for me. This is such an eye opener that one can think of this kind of a methodology and actually implement this research work. So I'm enamored of the kind of questions you're asking, Professor, if that's the right word to use. I'm afraid we have not come to the end of our conversation yet, but the episode seems to be, knocking at the doorstep of our departure today. I regret to say those words aloud, but viewers, we would be back very soon with Professor Naresh, who has been very busy throughout the semester, but he has promised to give us another sitting, and I'll try to squeeze in two sittings if possible. And thank you so much for joining us on Legends of the Philosophy of Science. I believe what we spoke about today transcends both science and philosophy into something deeply integral to both those disciplines. And I very much hope that you'll join us for the next episode. And thank you so much, Professor Naresh.
Oh, great summary. Congratulations.
Thank you.